Hi, I'm Dr. Paul, and welcome to Mature Masculine Power. I have a ton to teach you this weekend. We are going to cover everything that you've always wanted to know about how to form your mission in life as a man, how to attract women. We're going to go a little bit light on that and heavy on your mission as a man. Everything to do with friends, family, children, career, all the questions that you've had that are not covered by your typical program in dating or in relationships or in attracting women. Now, some of you know me through other speakers out there, dating experts, personal growth gurus, and that sort of thing. You might recognize this guy in the photo here. It was about 6 or 7 years ago that I first met David D., for those of you who know who that is. And you can imagine I've been up to quite a bit since then. The original program I did with him, actually 2 or 3 programs we did together, are over 7 years old. So I've been up to quite a lot since then. And a great bulk of what I discovered since I first did the program with David D. was that masculinity and femininity are like a whole world in themselves to learn about. There's a whole lot of circuitry of what's called the reptilian brain to learn about. And what you're going to find as we go through the rest of the weekend is that we're going to cover each of those circuits, okay? Each of the tools and techniques and tactics associated with masculinity itself and how that links to femininity, how it influences it, how they influence each other, has a lot to do with what this program is about. If you're interested in other kinds of things like personality matching, friendship, and love, that's the KWML Mastery Program. If you're interested in going really, really deep into really lofty things, high character, personal growth in general, not dependent on your masculinity, and nothing to do with femininity, but just really lofty stuff, that's MindOS Mastery. That has to do with just general personal growth, getting over problems like depression, anxiety, and just general growth. MindOS Mastery. And then finally, if you're interested in really going deep into dating, attraction, relationships, courtship, my courtship model is the Omega Male Program. We're not going to duplicate that here. We will talk about attracting women in a general way, but we're going to use a lot of storytelling to do this. You see, in dealing with emotions as a psychiatrist, dealing with problems of depression, anxiety, any kind of diagnostic problem in my medical field, there are a lot of rules and algorithms and patterns that I've found and put together into the MindOS program. But when we're talking about the reptilian brain, which is your instincts, or what Freud and Jung would call the unconscious, your reflexes, your animal nature, it's illogical. It's not based in logic. It's not based in rules and laws, except insofar as how human evolution has gone. And those reflexes and instincts aren't going away anytime soon. So in doing a lot of thinking the last several years about how in the world do I figure this out? How do I figure out a kind of system or method or circuitry to the instincts, to the unconscious? Turns out what I came up with is in some ways similar to what both Freud and Jung were looking at, which is that stories or myths can be valuable. That a story, just like a picture, can paint 1,000 words. And one of the things that I really loved about designing and creating these other programs for you are the diagrams that I use. When we look at MindOS Mastery, for example, we'll use tons of diagrams to explain boundaries. Psychology is invisible, but it's real. It's a lot like the border of a country. You don't see a line drawn on the ground, but if you cross it, something very real will happen if you don't have a password, or if you don't have a passport. So as a result, it's invisible but real, and psychology is that way too. And I was able to figure that all out about the higher brain and what psychiatrists call executive function. But I was kind of stumped at first about what to do about this illogical, non-rule-based reptilian brain until I started thinking about myths and stories. So the general principle that you're going to see is that if a story lasts for thousands and thousands of years, there must be some kind of universal appeal to it, right? You know what an art house film is, right? Some quirky little thing that a strange little director came up with, and it meant a lot to him, and other people thought it was kind of weird and different, and maybe they went to see it. But it wasn't like an Oscar-winning film or a Disney film, something that everybody can go see and love and always remember. So in that sort of way, ancient stories, myths that last, are like the opposite of an art house film. They have universal appeal. And what that means is they will apply to all men and women throughout all history in any culture. There are 3 levels to the brain that we use in many of our models. It's called the triune brain theory. It's evolutionary psychology. But as you know, I'm not an evolutionary psychologist or a Jungian psychologist. I've had psychodynamic training, psychoanalytic training, and education. And as a result, we tend to use the eclectic approach, they call it. And that means taking bits and parts of various theories and applying them to whatever the problem at hand is. One of the things that we find is that each school of psychology, as they're called, cognitive therapy, it's good for depression. Behavioral therapy is good for anxiety problems. Psychodynamics is good for being neurotic, having things about you that you're just not quite sure what's wrong. You have to do some investigation. So each theory or school of psychology has a tendency to be very, very useful for a small number of problems, and then tries to get applied to other kinds of problems, but almost never is universal. So some psychoanalysts use the eclectic approach, where it's synthetic. It's like using various theories for various types of problem. What I have done with MindOS, and what you're going to learn this weekend in Mature Masculine Powers, is unified all of those theories into one model. So when I talk about evolutionary psychology, I'm saying that school or branch of psychology which is very useful for understanding instincts and reflexes and animal nature, the animal nature in you. So you got 3 areas of the mind. You got the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and the higher brain. And when we're talking about the reptilian brain, we're talking about something that is only about gender. It's about life and death and reproducing, survival and reproduction. And that's common to all human beings ever born. You want to survive, and generally you want to reproduce, right? So when we look at ancient stories, ancient myths, we're learning something universal about all people, and they wouldn't have lasted as long as they have if they weren't accurate. They didn't speak to everybody. So we're going to be looking a lot at some literature, art, even going to be looking at some film, okay? I'm going to have some film suggestions for you that I'd like you to see. We'll discuss them. We'll look at some clips, but I'd like you to get these movies and take a look at them. And we're going to marry that to science, too, so that we can get some practicality out of this weekend. We're going to learn a lot about ancient god and goddess myths. One of the things I considered is whether I was going to mix cultures. Was I going to look at Hindu culture and Greek culture and Chinese culture and mix all of this? And what I ended up finding is that it made the most sense to me to stick with just one ancient culture, because it's like having puzzle pieces to put together. And sometimes you can't cross cultural puzzle pieces. So we're going to stick mainly with the Greeks and Romans for this particular program. But I hope what you get out of this is going to get you maybe a rejuvenated excitement, or maybe you never even cared about the classics and about ancient myths in a way that's really pretty cool, because you can get practical tools out of it if you know how to do the method that I'm going to teach you. Now, you might know me from other channels. I'm a blogger, for example, for Psychology Today, some of the major magazines. And I try to do a lot of talking about men and women. in my public writing, how there is still a big misunderstanding between men and women today. It's kind of like having to translate languages. One of the examples I always give is it's like if there was going to be a business deal between the French and Chinese governments, somebody's got to have to know some French and somebody's got to have to know some Chinese. And whoever's negotiating and meeting better know a bit of both to be able to ever strike a